Introducing a new podcast where a group of high school students investigate a crime and try to solve a cold case. Welcome to McMahon's Cold Case Investigation Unit.
The Zodiac Killer was one of the most infamous serial killers in history, and his true identity was never uncovered. There were a total of 7 attacks with 5 definite murders and 2 survivors. However, the Zodiac has claimed to kill at least 37 different people. Today, our team will investigate the gruesome murders by this man and set the record straight. The Zodiac Killer operated in Northern California between the 1960s and the 1970s. The first murder took place in a small city called Benicia. On December 20th, 1968, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were killed. Shots were fired into the vehicle in an attempt to get them to leave the car. Police think that David was shot as he was exiting the car, and Betty shot as she tried to flee the killer on foot. David was shot at point-blank range and died within minutes, while Betty was shot 5 times in the back and killed instantly. They were discovered at 11 p.m. on Lake Herman Road by a neighbor.
David Faraday, who was 17, and Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16, were high schoolers out on a date when they were shot dead. It was the first date that Jensen had ever been allowed on, and when the community learned they had been shot, they were shocked. Both the Faraday and Jensen families were confused as to why their kids were shot and who had done it.
Alright, so the next crime took place just around midnight on July 4th, 1969 in Vallejo, California, just 4 miles away from the Lake Herman Road murders. The couple, Darlene Elizabeth Farron and Michael Magoo, had stopped at an empty parking lot to talk. A second car pulled up next to them, and a man stepped out carrying a flashlight. He approached them and fired 5 shots into the car. Both victims were hit, and the killer began to make his way back to his own car. Magoo, as would anyone else, moaned in pain after he was shot, and the killer, upon realizing that his victim was still alive, returned and fired 2 more shots at each victim, and then left the scene. Michael Magoo was the lone survivor of the shooting.
Darlene Fernand, who was killed, was 22, and Michael Magoo was 19. And this is where things get a bit interesting. Fernand was a married woman in another man's car, late at night. Fernand's first and current husband was considered a possible suspect in the initial investigation, but was later ruled out. Magoo, the survivor, was able to provide the police with some information on the killer. When the killer came back a second time to shoot them again, Magoo was able to get a good look at the killer, but he wouldn't be able to identify the killer until 20 years later when he is actually shown a picture of the suspect and not just given names. Not being able to see a picture of the suspect was probably the biggest mistake of the whole case, but it is what it is.
The next victims were Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell, who were murdered on September 27, 1969, near Lake Berryessa. A man approached them while they were having a picnic. The man was wearing quite a, let's say, unusual costume. He was wearing an executioner-type hood that was black, and he had the Zodiac symbol on his shirt, which was a circle with a cross in it. He was being really creepy. He hid behind a tree before he confronted them. He told the couple that he was an escaped convict and needed money and a car to flee to Mexico. I honestly don't understand the point of him making up this huge detailed backstory, especially if he has a gun and is just going to kill them anyway. Like, there's no point for it. Honestly, if you already have the upper hand in the situation and you're going to kill them, then why make up this story? It's something that stumps me whenever I think about it. Also, he could have just used a ski mask. Instead, he made his own hat and shirt to kill someone. Looks like he had a lot of time on his hands. Anyway, after a few minutes of talking with Shepard and Hartnell, he stabs both of them multiple times and then leaves the scene.
Cecilia Ann Shepard was 22, and Brian Calvin Hartnell was 20 years old. Just like the first 2 victims, both Shepard and Hartnell were attacked while on a date they had gone on near lake. A nearby fisherman heard the commotion and called the park rangers, and by the time an ambulance shows up, which was over an hour late, both victims were in critical condition. Although they had been taken to a hospital, only Hartnell had survived. Hartnell saw the killer and described to the police a very tall and heavy-set man.
Paul Stein, who was 29, was the last confirmed victim of the Zodiac Killer. On October 11th, 1969, Stein, who was a taxi driver, was shot and killed while giving the Zodiac Killer a ride home. But he didn't know it was him, of course. He was shot once in the head at point-blank range. His wallet and ID were also stolen from him, along with a piece of his shirt. I know, at first that sounds like a pretty weird souvenir for a killer to take home, but he actually used it as evidence to send to the San Francisco Chronicle to prove that he killed Stein. There were 3 witnesses who saw the murder as it was taking place and called the cops. They described the murderer to the cops and then worked with the police composite artist to sketch the killer, which was then put on one of the most famous wanted posters in America.
Like Fernand and Majou, Paul Stein was shot. Stein was just a regular yellow taxi cab driver at the time and just happened to pick up the wrong guy before he went home to his loving wife. He was the last of the 5 definite victims of the Zodiac killer. Stein thought he was picking up a regular guy, but instead he picked up a serial killer, and now all he is known for is being the last victim of the killer who was shot in the head.
The Zodiac killer has a total of 18 letters where he describes the details of the murders and declares that he is the one who committed them. He gained more notoriety in the area after he sent letters to the San Francisco Editor, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times on July 31st, 1969. In his letters to the newspapers, he claims that he murdered David Faraday and Betty Jensen at Lake Herman, also Darlene Farron on July 4th. Here's an excerpt from his main letter. Dear Editor, this is the murder of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman, plus a girl on the 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I plus the police know. Christmas. Brand name ammo, Super X. 10 shots were fired. The boy was on his back with his feet to the car. The girl was on her right side, feet to the west. 4th July. Girl was wearing patterned slacks. The boy was also shot in the knee. Brand name of ammo was Western. After he describes facts about the crime, he then proceeds to threaten the editors to print his cipher on the front pages of their newspapers by Friday afternoon, August 1st, 1969. If they didn't cooperate, the Zodiac killer claims that he would go on to kill more people. Like he wasn't already planning to do that. After cracking the cipher, this is what the Zodiac killer had to say. I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of them all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all that I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to slow down or stop my collecting of my slaves for my afterlife. Wow. He sounds completely insane throughout that whole cipher. I can understand at the time people totally freaking out by what this man is talking about, but I can't stop laughing at how crazy he sounds. On August 20th, 1970, the Zodiac killer sent a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle where he begins a statement with, "My name is," and then he ends it with a coded cipher. In this cipher, his name is supposed to be found, however, no one has been able to decode it, which leads us to our 3 plausible suspects, Lawrence Kane, Earl Van Best Jr., and Arthur Lee Allen. Also, I refuse to even go into the popular theory that Ted Cruz was a Zodiac killer because he wasn't even alive during the time. Instead, I'll start with Lawrence Kane. A retired police officer, Harvey Hines, suspects that Lawrence K. or Kane is the Zodiac killer. Kathleen Jones, an escaped potential victim of the Zodiac killer, has claimed that Kane was her kidnapper after seeing his picture. Darlene Farron's sister, Pam, also states that Darlene was being stalked and harassed by Kane after seeing him murder someone only weeks before her own death. Kane also lived in an apartment near the crime scene for Paul Stein. In 1970, a woman by the name of Donna Lass went missing from a hotel in South Lake Tahoe where she worked. This is also the city where Kane had moved to only months before, and he also worked in that same hotel. Officer Don Folk, an officer who claims to have come in contact with the Zodiac killer, said that after looking at pictures of suspects, Lawrence was the closest of them as he remembered. In the cipher the Zodiac killer sent to the San Francisco Chronicle on August 20th, Kane's name can be found in the text. However, Kane does not match the heavy-set and large description given for the Paul Stein murder, nor did his handwriting match the Zodiac letters. Now, our second suspect we have is Earl Van Best Jr., whose son Gary Stewart has argued is the Zodiac killer. Gary Stewart's theory came to light after his book, The Most Dangerous Animal of Them All, in which he goes in-depth as to why his father has to be the original killer. Why would Gary do this, though? He goes around claiming that his dad is the original killer. Anyways, Van Best Jr.'s name is exactly the same amount of characters in the Zodiac killer's cipher, My Name Is, and he closely resembles a 1969 sketch. When Stewart tried to send his dad's DNA to the police, they refused to take it, claiming that there wasn't enough evidence linking him to the killer. But why not just take the sample and test it just in case? There's a possibility that Earl can be the guy you're looking for, and you guys just refuse to even test the sample. Anyways, Stewart also sent his father's marriage certificates to a document examiner who concluded that the handwriting from the license matched the Zodiac killer. Here's what Michael Waxhaw, the examiner, wrote in his report. I've conducted a forensic handwriting analysis on copies of the Zodiac letters, comparing them to a copy of the marriage certificate between Earl Van Best Jr. and Judith Chandler, the writer of which you have identified as Earl Van Best Jr. I'm virtually certain that the writer of the marriage certificate between Earl Van Best Jr. and Judith Chandler is the same writer as the writer of the Zodiac letters. End quote. So when we first found this, our team questioned how someone could say that this guy wasn't the Zodiac killer. His handwriting matched out of the letters from the Zodiac himself. Well, it turns out that the marriage licenses weren't actually written by Earl Van Best Jr. It was actually written by the church priest. And then the examiner later goes on to accuse that priest of being the real Zodiac killer. We now go on to our prime suspect for the murders, Arthur Lee Allen. I'll start with the minor evidence. Allen claims that around 1969, he got a watch for Christmas from his mother that had the notorious Zodiac symbol, a cross within a circle. He has also referred to himself as the Zodiac killer before too. In addition, on the same day that Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell were killed at Lake Berryessa, Arthur told his family that he was going to go scuba diving in that lake. Later that day, he returned home covered in blood and with a bloody knife. When the police searched Allen's home, they found small dissected animals in his freezer and other disturbing items. Also in an interview, Allen claimed that his favorite book was The Most Dangerous Game, a book about hunting humans. This is also mentioned by the Zodiac in his letters to the newspapers. Allen was an elementary school teacher in Valley Springs, California, and in 1974 he was arrested for child molestation. In 1991, Michael Magoo pointed out Allen in a lineup, which prompted the police to search Arthur's house again. This time they found homemade bombs. The Zodiac killer also threatened to construct some bombs, even sending a bomb diagram in his letters to the newspaper. However, even with the evidence we have that points toward Allen being the Zodiac killer, his DNA didn't match the saliva that was found on the envelopes, and his handwriting didn't match the letters. Although if Allen had any sense, he probably would have had someone else lick his postage stamps for him, which a friend told police that Allen had a habit of doing. I don't understand how you wouldn't suspect that somebody's doing something shady if they come up to you and be like, hey, can you lick my letter for me? I don't know how you just don't suspect anything about that person. I don't know. Anyways, these are the suspects that we have for our case, and Allen is the man we thought had the most evidence pointing him to being the Zodiac killer. Now our team is going to move on to tell you about the possible motives of the Zodiac killer.
The Zodiac killer did not have one motive. Reading through his letters, I could hear the tone of his voice. He was very narcissistic and egotistical. I could hear his wanting to be noticed and popular. Then he described the killings as a game. I could see that he didn't think the same as everyone else. He was different. He committed the murders and then said he committed them. Why would anyone kill someone and then say they did it if they didn't want to be known? He wanted everyone to know that he committed the murders and no one else did.
Now that you've heard about the crime, suspects, motives, and the victims of the Zodiac killer, who do you think it is? Contact us at McMahon'sColdCaseInvestigationUnit.com.